Many, many years ago, my grandparents were flying. This was back in the day when airlines used to give out bars of soap in the bathroom. So now they just have a pump dispenser. And my grandmother went to the washroom, came back to her seat, and then my grandfather went to the bathroom, and he came back and he said, Sonia, who was my late grandmother's name, Sonia, I need some soap. And she opened up her purse and she had taken all the soaps from the bathroom and loaded them in her purse. The purpose of that story is to sort of set a little bit of context. She was thinking entirely about herself and not about the rest of the community which she was a part of. I think we're in sort of a day and age right now where we're losing the community aspect of marketing. So what I mean by that is the lives of consumers are integrated. It takes a lot of people in order to deliver great marketing campaigns. If you take a look at some of the work that Mark Jordan was involved in with the Sick Kids Foundation, if you take a look at some of the work that Aaron has done at Crowdiate with Campbell's, it's not one person that enables great marketing to take place. And we're building up all these big silos. So normally people go, what's going on? How's work going? And people will know me as being either incredibly enraged about marketing or incredibly sort of supportive of a community and helping other people. But I tend to draw like three big circles. One is Google, Facebook, and Amazon in big ones. So in Canada, they take about 85% of every digital dollar. So Google and Facebook's in this building, they do about $6 billion worth of revenue in Canada. That's equal to about the majority of the broadcasters in Canada. Then I draw another big circle around marketers. I grew up at Procter & Gamble, so classically, CPG training. I see briefs right now, and Aaron might be able to back me up on this, that are absolutely appalling. There's no consumer insight on them. For those of you who are actually in marketing, 18 to 49 is not a demo, okay? My wife is on the upper end of that spectrum. She has nothing in common with a 19-year-old other than gender. And so the point is that we are, so we have Google, Facebook, and Amazon in one bucket. We have marketing in another bucket. We have the whole mess of media, which is sort of my world, and ad tech. And it's sort of like every single bucket thinks they can do it on their own. So marketers are taking media in-house because they hate their agencies. Google's going around the media agencies because they want to go client direct. And there's this idea that each person or each bucket can do it on their own, and they absolutely can't. And so for those of you that may or may not have read the book Sapiens, I thought there was an interesting visual in this. So if you go back like centuries and thousands of years ago, humans essentially needed their community in order to survive. You needed other people in your village or wherever you were from in order to get shelter, get food, and take care of you when you were sick. Without making this sort of politicized, as governments started to form, we basically started to lose the foundation of community, and we started to focus more on individuals because governments gave us some stability. My call to action for every single person here is, can we somehow get a little bit more in the middle? So can we stop worrying all about the individual, which I'll talk about in a second. So I ran my own company. It was essentially a small, insignificant company. We didn't put titles on our business cards. Why? Because it actually didn't matter. It mattered whether or not you did a good job. And I'll talk about that in a second. But my ask of everyone here is we got to get a little bit more in the middle and not worry so much about the individual and start thinking about a healthier community. So if you stop reading newspapers, if you stop paying for content, that's a bad thing. You can say what you like about high cable prices in Canada, but if you stop paying for cable, there's a whole sort of infrastructure around content development in Canada that actually goes away. And so if we can just start thinking about what happens when we bring these things a little bit closer together, I think it'll be interesting. So why does this actually matter? I think because we're focused more on individuals, there is a greater erosion of trust. So I was chatting with someone in the industry a couple days ago, and he had indicated that someone in his office had accidentally spent their entire monthly budget for a client in one day. So they went into a tool and they actually booked the entire campaign, spent it in a day. They called the technology company saying, listen, we made a mistake. What can you do for us? And they said, absolutely nothing. And so what this individual said, who's been in the industry for about 30 years, he said, you know, if 30 years ago I made a mistake, I could call someone up at the Globe and Mail or CTV Television or someone else, and they would make good. They would figure out how to get me unstuck. That simply doesn't exist anymore. You will get routed to customer success teams in Austin, Texas if you're a Facebook client. And if you're a Google client, no one will get back to you unless you spend $1 million a year. That's a problem. Like, that is a fundamental problem. If you can't pick up the phone and call someone and have a conversation about a problem. We used to always say that we thought we were doing a good job as a company if someone called us and said, hey, I just want to pick your brain on something. I don't want to buy anything from you. I don't have anything to actually work on. I just want to pick your brain. So where does this sort of lead us, and what do we need to think about? We have to start focusing on deep pieces of work. We have to start working on harder stuff and not the shallow stuff. You go to an escape room with your team, you feel like you get to know everyone, you don't. You stay up all night working on a problem because something has crashed and it's broken. That's actually when you start to do more meaningful work. The other thing that we have to do is we have to focus on the job and whether or not you're competent at doing the job. We have to move away from fancy titles. We have to move away from people feeling too self-important to call someone back. The difference between Canada and the US is the following for those visiting us from the US. In the US, you call someone and say, I'd like to talk to you for 15 minutes because I have an opportunity to solve a problem and make more money for you. They will take the call. In Canada, they want 10 examples of you having done it before they'll take the call. And they want to know the 15 people that you know in common that you went to nursery with. And if they don't know these people, then they won't take your call. So ultimately, what we need to do is we need to bridge individual and community. Why? For the following reasons. If you actually think someone is good at a job, you will trust them more. If you actually treat people with respect and give them time, you will have a more favorable view of their character, and so then ultimately you will want to work with them more. There's ample evidence that suggests people will go to talk to people in their office for advice and help, even when they're not competent, because trust factor is, their view of character is very high. If we all get to know one another, which means when someone reaches out to you, not with a generic LinkedIn note, because you can take a couple minutes to actually go a little bit deeper, it's just important to ask questions and be open to hearing what people have to say. So with that, I will leave you with 2 more questions. You guys have already done this, but maybe you'll do it at the break. But look to the person to your right and ask them the following questions so as to get to know them a little bit better. Vitaly already asked you to talk to people, but look to the person to your right and get them to answer this question. The idea being, go a little bit deeper with someone, get to know someone. We are out of time, so we'll go over this. And then the next thing is this. When someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise, the first thing, or oftentimes what I will do, is simply say, "Great to meet you, how can I help you?" And it's a very powerful phrase because essentially you're not asking for anything yourself, so it's my whole like give, give, get philosophy, which is ask someone how you can help them. And it's just a very nice way of sparking debate. I'll close just with the following. In the early 1940s, there was a building at MIT called Building 20. And it was where they had created something called the RAD lab. It was a radiation lab. Over the next close to 40 years, it became a building of like misfits. Like they stored pianos there. They had a whole bunch of other departments that simply didn't fit into the rest of the university. What ultimately happened in this building was something called knowledge spillover. You had all these people that did different things, and they started bumping into each other in the hallways, and they started sort of asking one another what they were working on, and they basically came from different disciplines and different lines of thinking. This building actually became one of the most productive buildings at MIT. So the Bose sound system folks came out of that. Noam Chomsky worked in this building and did work in linguistics. So the takeaway is, if we start focusing less on the individual and more on the community, if you start asking more people, how can I help you, and you learn more from other people, we will ultimately have a better marketing community in Toronto. We are still very provincial in our thinking. We are really not a world-class city. I don't care what any of those statistics say. We absolutely are not when it comes to marketing, because we simply don't go out of our way to help each other enough. If I asked everyone here with an angle towards tech, put up your hand the last time you drove to Kitchener-Waterloo to take a meeting with someone. Go ask someone in San Francisco the last time they drove down to Palo Alto, or someone in the Valley. They probably have done it 3 or 4 times in the last week. So what, people from Kitchener have to come see us because we're in Toronto, but we can't get on a train or drive on the 401 to go see them? So if you just adapt a slightly more humble mindset that it's not about you, but it's about something bigger, these collisions and knowledge spillover will happen, and ultimately we will have a stronger marketing community. Thank you. It's the benefit of going last. Everyone wants to go home. Oh, question?
Hey there, I thought that was a great presentation. You talked a little bit about like business to business losing that connectivity and not caring and not taking phone calls. I mean, I can start to see it happening in the tech world where, you know, you try to call Uber or Uber Eats, and you know, you realize you're not at the end of the day the actual customer. How are those businesses getting away with it, and what's kind of the future for them?
I'll try to answer the first one. I stay clear of trying to predict the future because I'm simply not smart enough for it. I think the following's happening. There's the concept of the barbell effect, and I think we heard it in some of our other presentations. The big are getting massive. There's like all these small little niche players, and the middle's getting eviscerated. It's happening to the middle class. It's happening to companies that are sort of in the middle. We've seen it in retail where, you know, 50, 100, 200 store chains are all closing because they don't stand for anything. I think they're getting away with it, to use your term, surely due to their scale. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I think we as Canadians have to help one another. So if there's someone doing clean tech, if there's someone doing outsourcing, if there's someone doing data integration, why not consider them? Not in a preferential way, but at least just give them a chance. The reality is, many of these companies are being built, for scale. They are so well funded. If you take a look at what SoftBank is doing, where basically they're making investments where it's a minimum of $100 million, they're taking at least 50% equity in these companies. That's unfortunately where in Canada we're at a huge disadvantage. And I think that's why, probably the Shopify story is such an interesting one, is because their CEO was adamant that he wasn't going to sell out and that he had every reason to be successful on the global stage. There's a book that was written about 10 years ago called Why Mexicans Don't Drink Molson. And the book is essentially about Canadians get big and then they get scared and they sell out. It happened to Inco, it happened to Molson, it happened to Labatt. The book, hence the 10-year-old reference, is a little out of date, but it talked about both BlackBerry and Cirque du Soleil, how essentially they didn't sell out. And they came up with great products and great ideas and they stuck with it. So back to your original question, I think they're getting away with it due to sheer scale. And the reality is, in Canada, we just don't matter. When I worked at Microsoft, when I worked at AOL, when I worked at Procter, we were typically number 7 on the list everywhere, which meant Germany, the UK, France, and maybe some South American countries all got prioritized before Canada. And that is just the reality of being in a country where 60% of the people are within a 2-hour drive of a US border, and there's fewer people here than California. So we just have to be better, but I think we have to help each other. Again, not in a gated or in sort of a regulated way, but we just have to help each other. And I'm not saying make bad business decisions, but just help one another. It's like, why wouldn't you take a meeting when someone calls you? Like, how hard is it on your way home from work to take a 5-minute phone call on the streetcar or in your car? We started a program because I was fed up. Does anyone here work for a media agency? Before I shoot myself in the foot again. I started a very public feud on LinkedIn with someone and I'm still paying for it. So true story. So I sell to media agencies. I was infuriated at the way I was treated. Like, infuriated. I'm a father, I have kids. If my kids behaved that way to anyone, they would be grounded until they were 100, okay? There was a funny little Instagram post where someone says, like, when I'm mad at someone, I put a fork in front of my face and I pretend they're in jail, right? Like, it's one of those. And so, it wasn't my joke. My wife sent it to me, but that's for another story. But we saw a problem. Like we said, listen, there's a marketing problem. So Mark and I worked together many, many years ago. I'm a total mutt. I worked at all these places. I was mediocre wherever I worked. I was last in my brand class to get promoted to be a brand manager, and I sucked when I was a manager and whatever. But the point was, I had all these different experiences. And so while not the smartest guy in the room, I've launched a CPG brand, I've launched a television station, a search engine, and an internet service, along with a bunch of instant messaging apps and browsers you've never heard of unless you're over 40. And the reality is, when folks like Mark and I, or even Aaron or others in the room sit around, we connect the dots in really weird ways, and there's pattern recognition. My wife's a physician. She's taught me, she says, the last thing you ever want to hear your doctor say is, whoa, we've never seen that before, and pull out their textbook. They want to go, oh, your limbs hanging off, axe through your, we've done that 100 times, don't worry about it. But we saw people growing up in industry. So people only did media planning their whole life. The stress of walking into work every morning at a packaged goods company, knowing the CEO can walk by going, are you ahead or behind on your shipment for the month? You have to walk that in order to understand the pressure. So we created a program my tiny little irrelevant company, along with LinkedIn, Zagbank, and Starcom MediaVest. We funded the program out of our own wallets. We didn't wait for government money. We didn't wait for a school to get, we saw a problem, and we created jobs for 4 people. So within 12 months, they go through 4 different companies, and they rotate through every 3 months. One of the objectives, aside from getting better talent in, was we wanted to create empathy. We wanted people to understand how hard a job is. So in my world, when someone calls on Friday afternoon of a long weekend and says, change the creative now, it's digital, it's like, no, and they don't understand why. They don't understand that there's all these steps that have to happen. If people start trying to understand what other people do, if they start to understand what's involved in the work, if they start doing the deep work and not the shallow work, better work will get done. There will be greater empathy for what people do. I went to work at an agency because I was a horrible client. I was like, I control the budget, you will listen to me. And they looked at me like, is this 1930s Russia or something, like where you're a Tsar or whatever? It's like, and when I went to work at an agency and we spent 3 weeks working on a pitch, and our first slide was like, you could just tell you had lost the room. Like, you worked for 3 weeks, and your first slide, they look at you like, that sucks. Like, I am not giving you a nickel. You start to have more empathy so that when you go in as a client and the agency comes in, you write better briefs. You have more conversations with them before they actually do the work. When they pick up the phone and they have a question for you, you actually talk to them because you know that's going to save you time and money, and you know it's going to save them time and money. So I went on a whole tangent. I apologize. But that's, I think, the answer to your question. Okay. Thank you. So